Thank you for joining us. We are going to start out today. We have a full agenda, and we're going to begin with a discussion on the bond and with a call to the district's attorney to make sure that we approach this appropriately, that the bond is or the board is communicating with the administration, and that we're crossing all our T's and dotting our I's. Bev Bonning. Good morning.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, Bev?
Oh, perfect, yes.
Hi, it's Eric Faulkner, Treasurer of the Board of Education here at TCAPS. Good morning.
Morning, thank you for calling me.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us.
Hey, Bev, Paul Solma here. I just want to briefly introduce you again as to let you know too, we're on a televised and formally published monthly meeting of the Board Finance Committee. Eric Faulkner, who first introduced himself, is our treasurer. Megan Crandall is the secretary of the board. She's also a member of this committee. And Scott Hardy is a board trustee, also a member of this committee. Steve Cousins is with us, and a variety of other administrators sitting in the room won't necessarily be involved in this discussion. They're here for other purposes. So with that, Bev, I'll turn it back to Eric maybe to start the dialogue relative to how we proceed talking about this issue at our upcoming full board meeting next Monday night.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, thanks again, Bev. We appreciate the chance to have a conversation. I know, and I guess I may turn it to you for your discretion on whether this is going to be a conversation that's more focused on the legal aspects that we need to be concerned about and the lines that we make sure we follow, and from your practical experience perspective on how to approach when you have an issues that we're considering at this time, and given the time frame that we have between now and November, what our concerns and focus should be on.
Okay, very good. Well, good morning, everyone, and it's a pleasure to participate in this committee meeting, and I appreciate you contacting me. How about if I establish a framework for the conversation that would be helpful for everyone?
Please.
Let me preface my comments by saying feel free to interrupt me. Periodically do this conversation, I'll pause to see if we have. But let me start out first with maybe just some basics about the election law deadline that everyone is probably already aware of or would need to be sensitive to. If the school district is looking at a November election under current election law, the date to submit the resolution calling the election and approving ballot language to your election coordinator, and in this case would be the county clerk, is Tuesday, August 27th, no later than 4 p.m. So obviously, the scope of the project, millage projection, ballot language, resolution, formal resolution, approving the ballot language and calling the election, all would need to occur before August 26th. From my pragmatic way of looking at it, I like to have everything buttoned down at about a week prior to that deadline, just in case something came up. We'd have a little bit of wiggle room if something needed to be tweaked before the election law deadline. Not that that happens very often, but it helps us all sleep at night.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any questions about that deadline or how it might interplay with the school district's planning?
No, I think that's clear. Thank you.
Okay, very good. I'll footnote my comment by saying there is a House bill that went through the House. It's in the Senate. I didn't look this week to see what happened, but bear with me, that moved that election law deadline up by 3 weeks. But the version of that House bill does provide that the law doesn't take effect for 120 days after it's been signed by the governor. So essentially what that means is the November election is grandfathered in, and we're still working with the August 27th deadline. should something change with that legislation, should something significantly change in the Senate and people get wild and crazy about that deadline or something, I'll call you, I'll let you know, I'll give you a heads up. But right now, I'm not concerned about that August 27th date changing.
Great, thank you.
So with that in mind, how about if we just frame the conversation about the scope of project? Let me preface my comments by saying I have spoken to Paul Soma, and I have to compliment you all for your thoughtfulness in how you are reviewing the scope of project and the diligence involved in doing that. I think you should commend yourselves for that type of due diligence and thoughtfulness in how you want to take this proposition out to your community. And I commend you for that, and seeking input and thoughtfully discussing the protocol at the board level for looking at all the separate interests and concerns about your school facilities, and with those separate concerns and interests, looking at a process or a protocol that addresses those. And I compliment you on that as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
So having said that, it's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there's an administrative recommendation for basically a base project. I call it the base project, meaning the auditorium, and then certain school construction projects, remodeling projects, facility improvements, and those are basically the two elements of what is a base recommendation. Correct?
That would be correct, Bev, as two, they would be, the recommendations, they'd be embedded in two different proposals.
Right. Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. Two
Yeah.
props. The one approximately 35 million, more or less, and the second prop 12 million, more or less. The auditorium at Central High School, or to help me understand this. Is this also to bring some equity between auditoriums as well?
Between the facilities of the two high schools, yes.
Yes. Right. Okay.
And Bev,
And,
just Bev,
oh, and there's also an element of technology in Prop 1, understandably so. That's focus for all school districts right now in the state of Michigan, particularly with some of the new assessment goals that the state of Michigan has for you in terms of technology and assessment. So, and then outside of that base proposal are other, I call them alternates or options or possible modifications to that base proposal. And those modifications may or may not be in one prop or combined with existing props. And so that's part of the discussion that the board needs to have at their level. So far, so good? That's accurate?
right, I want to make sure everybody's following along, and just, Bev, just for your information, we just have up in the background a page from the PowerPoint I sent you yesterday. It just says the recommendation, so that base recommendation from the administration to the board, that recommends 2 ballot questions at .2 and then .09 mils respectively. That's up in the background for our discussion. So, that's kind of the base recommendation coming forward from administration. And then I think the question before us is that how do we talk about exactly what you were just saying, adding or subtracting from that, modifying that, and then, having the board have a logical process relative to making resolutions, and then if they need to rescind resolutions, depending on how things either added or subtracted as they move down the line.
Okay, right. And I took a look at that PowerPoint last night in anticipation of the call. Okay. You really have, this is really a two-step process, as you know. One is to define the scope of the project and then give direction to the administration to begin working or to continue working with their professional team to bring the ballot language and resolution back to the board for its formal adoption before August 27th. So between now and then, the administration needs direction from the board. That's the appropriate protocol to then fine-tune the ballot language, the millage schedules, and the propositions, and bring that back to the board. So between now and then, the board needs to give direction to the administration as to whether you want 1 prop, 2 props, 3 props, 4 props, whatever. And that isn't necessarily a formal resolution as much as it is a motion that provides the authority to the administration to continue to move forward. So, and if you've got varying opinions on the board, which in my opinion is healthy and a reflection of a healthy organization, when you have various opinions on the board about moving forward and how you should approach the propositions, then my inclination is to say, to place before the board, and this is just based upon my 28 years of experience. There's not some magical statute out there that I can point to. It's just based upon my years of experience working with school districts. But what I would recommend to this committee and to the board is to place the various options in front of the board, whatever those options might be, and have a discussion about each option and the pros and cons of each option before any motion is placed before the board to approve. And in that format and in that open, transparent conversation and dialogue, you'll see where the board is gelling on what direction they should go in. And at that point, after all the options have been discussed, starting with the base proposal first, and if everyone agrees on the base proposal, and then the only conversation after that is the other options adding to that base proposal or not, and what those options are, the pros and cons of each option, and then a motion is presented to the board. I don't think it's necessary to have, well, I can tell you this, it's not legally necessary to have a motion on each option unless the board feels politically or as a matter of public policy they want to have a vote on each option. But certainly a dialogue and a discussion about each option is appropriate, the pros and cons of each option, and then the board decides whether they want a motion on each option or whether the opinions have gelled to the point where one motion can be presented and the board can vote on it, up or down.
How important is it, Bev, to make sure that the options that are discussed are either, mutually exclusive or don't overlap, or do you say that as long as we're just discussing them, it's okay if they do, and we can have that type of discussion and be presented in that way? Or if we know that we are going to vote on them, then we need to be a little more careful, or where would you?
Oh, and what was that Eric?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay. So is your question, I want to make sure I understand your question. Is your question, should we vote on each option, or should we just discuss each option all at the same time?
Well, if we know, well, let's just, I'll put it in a specific way. If we know that we're not going to vote on the options, we're just going to discuss them and then kind of, as part of that discussion, decide what we will actually vote on, then we don't have to be so careful that our options aren't considering different portions of the same thing in a different package, let's say. So that, for example, if we're talking about Central and one option is to have it as a third ballot proposal and another one is to throw it in as part of a previous proposal, and a third option is something else, we can discuss all those, decide what direction is preferred, and then vote on a more clearly defined and exclusive option?
You mean later?
Yes.
Or in the same meeting?
In the same meeting.
Oh, sure. So you're suggesting that there be a discussion of all the different options, but there's really only one vote, and the vote is on what you perceive to be a consensus at the board level, or pretty close to a consensus, on which option the board members prefer.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, not to throw a big monkey wrench into this, but theoretically, you could put, and I've seen this happen once in my 28 years, and it was painful to watch the board go through this. One time in my 28 years, I witnessed a board taking each option and voting up or down until they got to the greatest number of votes for the best option. And it was so painful for the board to go through that. And I just really wasn't sure that in that circumstance, because there was some controversy involving a particular closure of a building, but there was some controversy. And so it was really awkward for the board and politically awkward. And I felt that maybe that wasn't necessary if there had been just a general conversation about all the options and the pros and cons of each option. And then in that conversation, you get a sense of where the board is going, a consensus at the board level. And then you vote, then a motion is proposed for a particular, for 1, 2, or 3 propositions or more. And then you take your up or down vote on it. Although, if there are board members who feel it's really important to isolate each option and to have an up and down vote on each option, that's fine too. That's within your purview to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, what's difficult about that is, which option do you put out there first to vote on?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so what if one option becomes a 4-3 vote, and maybe a different option would have been 6-1 or 7-0?
Mm-hmm.
So it's, to me, the only way to flush out the option that seems to have the greatest degree of support and greatest consensus is to have the dialogue first. Because if you just vote up or down on each option, again, and I'm restating where I started, but then you're voting up or down, and if you start with a particular option, and it's a 4-3 vote, okay, that's passed. And now all of a sudden you realize, oh, we could actually get a 6-1 vote on the next option. We have to rescind our previous motion to vote on the next option that's 6-1. And that just gets procedurally very complicated and complex, unnecessarily so, in my humble opinion. So if Beverly Bonding ruled the world, I suppose I would say, well, I would have an open dialogue. Each option, take each option one at a time, talk about each option, the pros and cons of each option. You get a sense in that conversation how all the board members feel, and give every board member, and I know you will, an opportunity to discuss their opinion about each option and the pros and cons. And if you don't need a formal vote, each board member, you go around and say, well, board member Crandall, how do you feel about each option or this option? And you discuss each option. Each board member expresses their opinion, and then someone dips their toe in the water with a motion based upon the dialogue that's occurred at the board level.
Okay. Any other? I think that sounds great.
Well, good.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Is there anything else I can respond to while you have me on the phone? Sorry, I don't answer labor questions, though. Only finance.
I think we're good. Bev, I think we're good. We appreciate your time and your expertise and help with this as we move forward.
You're welcome, and I'm looking forward to working with the district and working, of course, with Steve and Paul, and just stay in touch if you have any other questions. And I know they will. They're very good about that.
Thanks, Beverly.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Have a good day.
Thank you, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we can move right into action
Okay,
items.
we have a full agenda, and a lot of these items, I think, are somewhat familiar with you, and if we need dialogue, certainly we'll have it. If we can move right
Can we
through,
just
we'll.
back up for a second,
Go ahead,
though?
sorry, Steve.
Because from the conversation, I'm not exactly sure how you want to have that conversation. Are you going to go with a discussion and then have a motion made? So will someone talk to Kelly? I can talk to her if you want to, or Eric, if you want to call her.
I'll give her a call.
And let her know? Okay, good. Because I think she's going to want to know how to frame the conversation. She might have you do it.
I was actually thinking we could invite Bev up here and she could add another one of these infamous meetings she could add to her resume. We'll just go through every single option. All right. Thanks.
That would be an infinite number.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, move on to the action items. The first one is at, the early childhood department, part of our community service fund, which I'll probably mention this again later in the agenda as we talk about our budget update toward the end of the meeting. Jamie has done a wonderful job of really taking a business model approach. I don't always, that terminology sometimes does and sometimes doesn't work relative to schools. There's a lot of different issues that come into play there. As it relates to the fee-for-service program through the early childhood department and the attempts that Jamie is making to provide universal preschool and some other opportunities for children, it does apply because we're not getting revenues necessarily from a foundation allowance, we're getting them fee for service. Now, there are various ways that we get that, as you know. We encounter the same problems that businesses encounter, and you know that we've been here, we've talked about the delinquent accounts and how we've managed that down. It's a metric we're very proud of, that's shared between the child care department and the business office, that has come down dramatically. And as we look at this, the other thing that we have now is following up on accounts and the follow-up necessary to collect that. And we want to propose a small fee for that, and Jamie has some data there to do that. We want the board to know about it and approve that going forward.
I'm going to ask that you pass this around. This is coming to you a little late because we were pulling the numbers together. This is as of today, how many calls we've had to make. Also understand this is only for the tuition-based preschool. The total balance today, if you were to run it, outstanding balances that exist, knowing that the charges have been given to all parents to finish out the school year, total balance right now is $2,409, and $500 of that is DHS reimbursed. So we think that we know that we'll be below $2,000, and we anticipate we're going to be below $1,000 for the collection of revenues. That's coming from a $110,000 outstanding balance 2 years ago.
And that's out of a total of how much, how large a revenue stream?
It's over $1 million.
Okay.
It's over $1 million. Now, if you'll notice, these are the phone calls that were made only to the tuition-based families, because we restructured where we took a couple hours from our managers, took that responsibility away from them, and we have one person here at central office that's doing the phone call reminders, your balance is past due, and collecting it. She, along with Carrie Sattler, have done an excellent job, and you can see that laid out here. But we still have an area when we look at correcting and adjusting that we would like to tackle, and that would be the extended day portion. When we look at balances that are outstanding right now, and we only bill to date with extended day, we are out $31,602. We believe that if we charge a fee for those reminder calls, we're anticipating $10, we're reminding you your balance is past due, we can take those dollars, add it to the service that we're currently providing to collect more revenue from the outstanding balances of the extended day. Let me put in perspective for you what $30,000 will do. For $30,000, we can provide preschool for 20 students 4 days a week, free. So what we're leaving on the table in extended day leaves 20 students without preschool. So we think it's important that we get on top of those balances, that we make sure that we are providing the service to our families, and it's just kind of circling that loop of how are we going to continue to fund more free preschools for families that can't afford it, while making sure we're collecting the revenue from the families who can. So that's the $10 proposal for you.
At what point do you trigger the $10 fee? I mean, is it 30 days, 60 days?
No, it's when the balance is overdue. We were
By
thinking,
how long, though? I mean, how long is it overdue before you generate the call?
good question. They're supposed to pay 2 weeks in advance. So if the balance is 0, then they're 2 weeks in advance. If it's past due by $200, that's when we make the call. So that means they're 2 weeks in the rear. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I'm still somewhat skeptical that a parent who is delinquent on their payment is necessarily going to be incented to go ahead and make the payment because you're gonna charge them more money. That may work. I don't know, maybe the threat of that would work.
Well, I know that if I don't pay my, if I have 30-day terms for a purchase that I make, if it's 31 days, I'm charged 1.5% extra. So I'm darn sure I'm gonna pay after, 28 or 29 days to make sure I don't go near it. So if really they have 2 weeks before anyone's making that call, to me, that sounds reasonable. And maybe we don't accrue $30,000 in late payments. Maybe it comes down to 15 or 10 or 5, just like with the preschool program.
We would make sure that we're working with our families. We don't want it to be a negative, but I will tell you that of the calls that you see, Diane can give you 15 family names that are repeated calls. It's every time. And I think it would be an incentive to not have to have those phone calls.
Is there any kind of subtle reminder that's not fee-based before you institute the $10?
We were thinking that we wouldn't do that in the month of September, just so we could get people used to the system. But we would tell them in the month of September with a note to all families and then a reminder note in the middle of September. Remember, if you have to make a call to collect the balance, it will be a $10 fee. So it's not that we want to charge people. We just want to eliminate some of the time that she's spending calling on some of these accounts and have her
I
spend
understand.
time collecting on the other accounts.
And it's behavior modification.
It is, it is. The other piece of it that is a little more positive that Paul and I have discussed is we've collected revenue by selling raffle tickets. So we're gonna hold some of that to be an incentive to pay. So if a family is out $200 and mom and dad have both lost their jobs, we may be able to take $50 of that and say, we know you are out $200. If you can pay by Friday, we're gonna move that down to $150. So that we have an incentive to pay on time and trying to make it as positive as possible. But also knowing that our goal here is to get to universal preschool, and we're in a self-funded model. So we have to collect every dollar we can in the most economical way that we can. So,
I would encourage and be in favor of a proposal that gives some type of grace. Now, whether that's having the reminder call and a notice that's mailed out in September, or whether that's everybody gets one call that's complimentary, where they get a personal explanation of how it works on the phone, and just say, hey, this is a courtesy reminder. If we do this again, this is what'll happen. We're on a. I appreciate the efficiency elements. We're also now on this edge of customer service and satisfaction, and this is a part of the experience, and that I think has some benefits. So.
And I'm assuming that you run into some parents who have extenuating circumstances, and, I mean, there could be exceptions on why they're late, and that we at least listen to the explanation and see if we can work with them on that.
we have several that right now that are on payment plans that we have set up for them. So we do try to work with them. But I want to remind you that this is a fee for service. It's how we pay our employees. So we can listen to a certain extent, but the business model would be that we collect the amount of money that they have incurred by receiving the fee.
Now, is the ultimate hammer on this that their child can no longer attend?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And to make sure I understand what you were saying before, is that the proposal is by collecting a fee on 694 or 594 late calls a year, that $6,000, $7,000 can be levered to help increase the collection on the 31,000 that's outstanding for extended day by purchasing the hours or funding the hours that we would need to administratively support that.
I think it'll do two things. I think it will cut down on the number of calls we have to make, and then we would leverage the same fee in the extended day when we are making those calls. So it would be self-funding the service call to collect the money.
I think,
Do it very nicely.
yeah.
As nice as possible.
To me, I'm in favor of that. I like the idea of a reminder call. I know I need them from time to time, and if I need more than one, that's my fault. If I get one, I appreciate it.
To be clear, do we have support to bring this on?
I
to
think we
bring
can
this
bring it
forward?
on.
Okay,
Yep.
and so that will be recorded in the minutes. Thank you, Jamie, thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your attention to detail on that.
Yeah, thank you.
The next item for action is the approval of bid services and purchases relative to the curriculum department. I want to note that these purchases have been vetted in the curriculum committee, and so those minutes are available, that discussion is documented. Because of the level of the purchase, because of the board policy relative to purchasing and state policies relative to purchasing, they have to be approved by the full board, and then therefore then vetted through finance. So Jane is here to answer any questions, and Ken is also here relative to any purchasing questions that may arise because of the magnitude of these. I will say that I have worked directly with Dr. Moore on all of these purchases to make sure that they're within our budget parameters. Especially relative to the middle school math and elementary math purchases. We are taking some funds from the current year, eliminating them from our budget in the current year, and this will be done through a budget amendment, and moving them into to next year. That's how we do that as a carry forward. It's a very specific amount of money that's being used to help supplement that, but that will be reflected in the budget amendments as we move forward. So these are all general fund purchases, and with that, I would open up to questions, obviously to Jane or
And Biz Ruskowski is present as well for the elementary language arts purchase request, should there be questions.
Could you explain the connected mathematics, the online
The
tools that are available, and how that can be leveraged by the one-to-world devices?
That is an excellent question, and that is something that we received more information on this morning. We are in the process of exploring the extent to which the textbooks may be available totally online to us. This purchase request is based upon the hard copy textbook. It is our understanding that if we do go to online or a combination of online and hard copy textbooks, that the price could be reduced. We are working on that, and with the implementation of One-to-World in grades 6 through 8, we're investigating that. So what I would assure you is that whatever we decide in the end, it will be this amount or less, and certainly not exceed it. We also have online resources available for parents right now that have been created by teachers and administrators within the district that do link into the CMP as well.
And are these, in this case, are these workbooks, or are they consumable, or, no, they're not consumable?
The elementary request is for consumable
The
workbooks
math, yes.
that we have to have annually, so we come back to board curriculum and board finance every year on that. And then the CMP3 would be going to the next edition, which was piloted at both middle schools during this past school year.
Okay.
Jane, that was going to be one of my questions. So obviously, there is an option available for customization on these.
Yes.
And those would be sort of a black and white format that they would do based on our curriculum and reorganizing the material within the workbooks or whatever the soft cover versions of whatever they provide.
Yes.
Because obviously, somebody's going to ask questions about the core standards and whether or not we are flexible enough at some point to be able to modify should something egregious occur.
Yes, and it is truly our belief that the core standards are the target for which we should be shooting because it's what students are going to need to be competitive in the global world.
Sure. No, I would agree. But, I mean, I just want to make sure that we have the flexibility to be able
Yes.
to do something different should we need to.
And we're,
Just call it whatever we want. I mean, we don't have to go with what, because somebody's upset that it's called the core standards, we can always call it something else and do what we want. I'm not too worried about it.
Well, be that as it may, at some point we have that flexibility. That's what I was looking for.
excellent questions, thank you.
So with, I'm just trying to pull up the latest one because I just kind of saw that the latest version of the packet, but I'm just looking at the elementary math workbooks.
Yes.
Is that just sort of another, we're gonna get through another year with this system? So we're going to purchase from the same company? I just couldn't pull it up on my iPad. Can you explain that one to me a little bit?
I would not say that we're just going to get through another year with the system. We have been working intensively with our elementary math leaders. We have one at every elementary school. Todd Neibauer and Sandy Lowe have been involved with the group as well using lean tools. We have made significant modifications to the curriculum, and we have seen very encouraging growth from fall and mid-year to our recent spring end-of-year NWEA testing. And we believe that's as a result of a number of things that we are changing up. For example, we're making some modifications in what is being taught when. We are also supplementing with basic skill, competency, fluency-based pilots, for which we're seeing some very encouraging results, and looking at how we're going to implement those district-wide next year. Our NWEA end-of-year results indicate our MEP proficiency should be greatly improved based on the work that we've been doing if the NWEA proficiency projections hold.
So these workbooks, are they repeats of what we've been doing the last few years? So
Yes.
supplementary material?
Yes.
Jane, typically, having been in this market for a long time,
Yeah.
there are supplemental aids that come gratis with whatever adoption of textbooks. I'm assuming that in the math curriculum, there might be some math lab type components that we could avail ourselves of that would come as, again, gratis supplemental aids to whatever we're adopting.
That would be in the event that we decide to purchase the next edition and/or move to another math curriculum company. And we're just not at that point yet, and that in part is due to the Common Core standards coming out and few, if any, elementary programs having complete alignment with the Common Core. So as a result of that, we have teachers this summer from all of our buildings attending math workshop training through Oakland County. And we also have teachers in grades 3 through 5 attending a workshop put on by Kate Arvo from the ISD regarding conceptual mathematics, providing a deeper understanding of the content within mathematics, which our elementary teachers are being asked. We're also participating with the ISD next year in a balanced mathematics program. So we're, as you can see, we're increasing our expectations with regard to math instruction and providing the necessary professional development for our staff.
Okay.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, I think we can move this along and put it on the consent.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item is one that has, propped up this year unexpectedly and recently, and that is, student information system. You may recall that we went through a very thorough process just 3 years ago in the selection of our current vendor, and, unfortunately, the world changes, that vendor and some background in the ownerships and things change there. They're no longer gonna support the system that we had in place, and Todd can give the direct background, but it became, I would say, an emergency situation for us that we needed to move our student information system, or we were risking having a system that didn't have technical support from the provider. And so Todd has been pulling whatever remaining hair out of his head that he has, trying to get this, I can make that joke because I'm bald too up here. So, trying to get this thing in place, and I'm just gonna kind of turn it over to Todd to give some background on what it is that you're proposing. And I will say that we are having to modify the budget to incorporate this purchase on a one-time issue. You will see that noted later on in the meeting.
Thank you. It was 4 years ago that we did the evaluation for our current system, and it was based on the company came forward with a student information system product that went along with the grade book that we had been using for 10 years already. And so there was, not to rehash that whole thing, it was a very lengthy process that we went through, and we picked the one that 4 years later they notified us in April that they're no longer going to support their student information system as of June 2014, and that was, when you look at the timelines for how we put out our bid last time when we switched, we were already a month behind what we had done before. Unfortunately, we have experience with a switchover, or fortunately, I guess, depending on how you look at it. The previous system before the one we have now, we had for 13 years, so our expectation was not that, certainly that we would be looking again in 4 years. So that was unwelcome. Be that as it may, we did put out the bid for a student information system. We actually used the same, essentially the same structure that we did before. It's quite extensive. It requires the vendors to respond to at least 1,000 different items that have things that we have identified as necessary, important for our processes. And if not, if they don't have it, it's one of those things that helps us identify what our path for doing customizations and things are. So it's a working document that doesn't just elicit a bid for us. It also acts as helping us to decide what type of work needs to get done before we go. So those responses are really important to us, regardless of just the money that's involved in getting that bid back. So we posted that on the 18th, 19th. We had responses from 6 different vendors, and what we have is a recommendation then for you to go with Pearson Power School with a first-year cost of $120,476. We also required them to submit a 5-year cost analysis too. That brought them to be the second lowest bidder at $312,000 and a little bit more, $842,000. The low bidder in this case was SunGard. We chose not to go with them. One of some of the biggest considerations for that was one, our entire ISD is on Power School currently. There is an offer of help from the ISD for data conversion, primary support, where we can actually use their person in our support loop and call them. data integration and student achievement movement of data for all the different systems that we have. You know, currently we're on Easy IP and several other ones that we share with them. And so that level of support was going to be a pretty important thing. The environment in the state, too, has shifted considerably in the last 4 years. There is a push towards consolidation, and the state would like to see people, actually, if they could get it, they would like one student information system, but barring that, they would like to see no more than, say, 3 or 4 if they could get their way. And they're going about trying to get their way by incentivizing people to move. So they offer money. If you're in a consortium, then, you know, here. Currently, the state is building a data connector to pull in student information from student information systems. Power School is one of them that they're building connectors for, and there's a couple other ones. Skyward was one that's on our bid here. Our low bidder is not one of them. And one of the threats that you have with that, and one in particular too, is that there's currently one ISD in the entire state that uses that product. The rest do not. And it's not a situation where you really want, if you have the support from the ISD that's already been offered, they're in the ballpark financially. It just makes a lot more sense for us to stick with that and go with the Pearson product as opposed to SunGard. So, with that said, you know, if we gain approval here, we're really going to be hitting the ground running, and we have to do a lot of data conversion and analysis over the summer, and then we'll actually be doing training for schedulers probably in October, November, and they'll start actually working in the product for next year in December. So it's a process that we wish it had already started. So.
How will this work, since we have Ms. Thomas here? How is this going to work? I know that was a consideration when we switched scheduling for transportation, that it worked so well with this system. What do you think about this going forward?
I believe it'll work just as well, or if not better. There is geocoding and boundary recognition within the program, so you put it in there and it'll tell you what schools it belongs to. It provides the latitude and longitude. That's data that we can transfer over into our current Versatrans system. So certainly it's a primary concern for us to make sure that gets all set up and working, but I'm not overly concerned that we would have problems with that. So I don't know.
Yeah, and I think we're fortunate right now. Kingsley has Power School, so we've been able to kind of test it out and get some information from them. I know Michelle's been working on that right now, so I think that's a benefit to us to look at it ahead of time.
Todd, question for you. In fairness to the bidders that were here, was SunGard sort of alerted to the fact that this is one of the major requirements that we were after, that we have a system that at least marries itself to what the ISD is doing and other schools in the state are doing, and they just didn't meet that qualification?
Well, yeah. I was very upfront with the vendors themselves. They come in and their first question to me was, "Should we bid on this?" And I'm saying, I can't answer that question for you. Absolutely, we're looking for competitive bids on this, but the understanding that what the state is doing is out there amongst bidders, and also the idea that being a school, we were kind of an island in the midst of a Power School Sea, is not something that's lost on them when they come to present to us. So telling them what the landscape is, I didn't really have to tell them what the landscape is. They already know what it is. The same people who bid on ours are traveling. They're probably wearing marks in the pavement between here, Alpena, down to K-Risa, Kalamazoo, Fort Wayne. Those are all the people that are going off of Pinnacle and moving into something else.
So of the 1,000 points that you wanted them to at least consider as part of the proposal, this would have been one of those points that we get some compatibility, at least with the existing system in the ISD.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. That is one of the sections, as is special ed systems and scheduling, details about scheduling, and I mean everything that in terms of functionality that we have for this system right now is included in there for them to respond to. In some cases, folks would say that, no, we don't offer anything in that area, but, it doesn't mean just transportation. I mean, there's a way for us to figure out exactly what features are there, what are not, and then all of them have customization capability. So that's what we need to figure out, is what kind of customizations do we need to do. As it is, the ISD has a collection of customizations that have already been done to help make Power School fit the environment or landscape of Michigan better. Those can come to us at no cost and be applied to our site, as well as our partner with MIS for accounting out of Macomb also has modifications that they've done for Power School that would also be at our disposal.
Okay. And this is Pearson, as in Pearson Publishing out of New York. Okay.
Todd, could you please explain the first year, 5-year breakdown on the quote? I mean, I assume there's a first year licensing fee and then an annual ongoing licensing fee, and then follow that up with how that compares the 50,000 or so that years 2 through 5 look like they're going to be for Pearson, how that compares with the current outlay for our existing system?
Sure. The major sections in the first year are licensing of the system itself, the setup, and most of them don't actually do data conversion, although some offer that as a service. One of the problems with data conversion is that you know your data and they don't, and so they may say that they're going to convert your data, but you spend just as much time looking at it anyway. So that's not something that we were really entertaining as part of it, although some added that as an option. Training is a huge part of it. We did 1,600 hours of office staff training last time, all told. That doesn't include principals and other administrators that weren't, that were able to just come, that we didn't either have to pay or to get a sub for in their work. So there's a tremendous amount of training that goes into that as well. And then the initial technological setups of installing their system on, you provide the platform for them, and then they come in and they do the initial install and configuration for the first year for your system, and then they pass it off to you from there. That was also an area where the training section where we have an advantage with using Power School, because the ISD has a certified trainer that they would offer to us at a reduced rate over what we would have to pay for some of those from Pearson. So in that regard, we're going to be trying to put together a schedule that may be able to save us some money on some of the training. There's certain things like scheduling. I'm going to have the Pearson schedulers come in and do that, just because the experience level that they'll have in scheduling for a district our size and with the number of variables that we have is probably not something that the ISD has looked at much. So that would be a case where we wouldn't be looking to save money on the training by going with the ISD, but for a lot of the other things we could. So those are kind of the big areas. A lot of times they'll also have a little premium for the first year. That's not true of the Pearson option, but some of them do. They have, if the normal cost is going to be, $4 a kid or $4.50 a kid or whatever, they charge $7.50 the first time. For what reason, I don't know. It makes sense to them, I guess, for their own financials. But going forward, Pearson is $4.50 a kid, which is exactly what we're paying already. So the ongoing licensing costs of the product are something that will fit right within the budget that we currently have allocated to us.
Thank you.
Sure.
Todd, one last question. What about data backup and security? Does Pearson offer the ability to back up off-site the student data, or are we going to be able to do that ourselves?
Well, we'll be doing it ourselves. They do offer a hosted option. It's an additional $26,000 a year, and so we've said no thank you to that. Right now, we do have off-site backup ourselves, though, and so for as long as I've been with the district, we've maintained our own system and done our own off-site backups for that. When it comes to hosting, I'm still in conversation with the ISD right now about exactly where it's a possibility. They host Power School for a number of their districts. We're a completely different animal in that respect because of the size and the resources it takes to run ours. But we're at least talking to them about it. But we would do our own hosting. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I think that's, yeah, good.
Super. Next on the agenda will be operations. I think, well, for certainly the first two have been discussed previously as we looked at our capital planning and our projects, and especially relative to what we call our critical needs list. And the first one being the security system at Interlochen Eastern and Glen Loomis. You may remember that we made a point to add that after this committee discussed it, in order to make sure that the security functionality is there, knowing that even into the future, those buildings hopefully will be remodeled, but we felt the importance of the security outweighed the potential cost there. So the bids are before you. There's also a summary included, which I appreciate that Paul put together to show the entirety of the cost, not just the bid that you're approving. And I'd certainly open for any questions or comments on that.
Paul, thank you for the additional information on the breakdown. You're rendering this time quiet. You've already laid everything out. I can maybe comment on the margins, but that's about it. It's great.
Super. Okay, we'll move on to the next one then. Then that's the mechanical heat pumps. I want to make sure that there's full disclosure, and we've indicated that Mr. Hardy did provide his familial relationship form and adhered to all requirements as it relates to that issue, and that's noted in the your packet there. So this is for heat pumps. We have discussed this in the past. There is a nice fluctuation, and we've had these discussions, and I appreciate that Paul has also looked at the explanations for why, you know, the modified estimate as of April was $670,000, the bid coming at $487,000. And again, these provide us contingency dollars into the future, and we will continue to allocate these dollars later in the meeting. We'll talk about our next quarterly bond review meeting where we bring all this together. Questions? Thank you, Paul. Good work on that. Third is waste hauling. We put this out to bid once every 3 years. We make sure that we have the ability to modify, or we kind of 3-year rolling contract. So if there are problems, we could end that within 1 year. We have not had problems. In fact, we've been pleased with our service from American Waste. I believe there are representatives from American Waste here in the audience. They were the low bid over the next 3 years, and it's recommended that we continue with American Waste based on their proposal. Thank you.
We can push that
Okay.
forward as well.
Good deal. Next on the agenda is our Kingsley Transportation arrangement. I want to really commend Christine Thomas for her work in this arena. I believe this is a lighthouse arrangement relative to TCAPS providing this. I think there's a greater vision for this region as we continue to learn and go through continuous improvement relative to eventually regional transportation. We have had the dialogue that if we truly did regional transportation, which the thing that scares folks on that is it blurs boundary lines between school districts, but if you truly had regional transportation, the savings are in the 7 figures for the region. Now, there's a lot that goes into that, and you don't go from individual transportation to regional transportation overnight, but I do think you start with things like this. And we have had a successful year working with Kingsley. I believe, well, I know because their superintendent has told me that he has been immensely pleased with the relationship and the service that we're providing. The contract is before you. There's just 2 somewhat minor modifications. One, to start to include cameras on the Kingsley buses, just to evolve that. And then one, we looked at the 30-day out clause for any reason you can get out within 30 days. That didn't serve either party well, because if we were to get out in 30 days, Kingsley would be left high and dry. If Kingsley was to get out with 30 days' notice, that would leave us with costs that we couldn't absorb. So we both agreed to modify that to 90 days to give comfort to that. Both parties have indicated that don't want to make use of that part of the contract, but it's in there for protection. I will say that, just for clarity, that Kingsley pays for the entirety of their operation, so all direct costs are covered by Kingsley, including the management there. Other than the overhead costs, they offset our cost by $26,000, I believe that is, so $26,000. That's the quote-unquote, there is not a profit margin, that's their coverage of overhead costs. Is that enough? Is it not enough? Well, we wouldn't be getting that, so it is decreasing our costs there. You know, that I think is the advantage, that if parties were to come together in a relationship like this, you would see that you're paying just costs, you're not paying necessarily quote-unquote profit, and that's the advantage we have. And obviously, because we have got our cost aligned with the market, we're able to provide this service for Kingsley and add a value to them. So, Christine, I think I probably took all your thunder there. I want to just commend you and compliment you on how you've managed this contract. I get to watch Christine do this front and center, and I see how she handles this, and professional expertise, front to back, top to bottom. So, anything, Christine?
I don't really have anything. Everything's going really well. The superintendent's happy, the board is happy, so we haven't had too much to discuss. The first year, we had some unexpected costs, which we thought may happen, because I've never done this before, and they hadn't either, so not too much, but, you know, little things like, oh, we need a copier, because the one that was in there was actually owned by an employee that no longer works there. So just small things like that, but,
Small
you know,
town stuff.
it was just agreed upon that they're gonna pay actual costs, so anything that comes up, we just talk about it and move forward.
And Christine, that applies to the camera installation as well?
They would be paying for the cameras, cause they are their buses.
Okay. And the 90-day out clause is a reciprocal clause. Either party can get out
Yeah.
with a 90-day
And I think
notice.
that was, put in the first year for the board's comfort level, because it was something new for their board's comfort level. I don't know that, we're thinking maybe next year it could be something that just wouldn't be part of the contract, but
Well, it's not a bad thing to have there as a,
there is room
Fallback
in the
position.
contract for cancellation with cause, obviously, but the without cause, I think they just felt more comfortable the first year.
okay.
Do we know what Kingsley saved in actuality this past year?
We don't have final numbers just yet, but it was estimated to be about 100,000.
We did try to apply for the a consolidation of services grant from the state, but didn't get it. I think it was a great consolidation of services, but for whatever reason, we didn't get that when we
Well, they
applied.
gave it all to Ypsilanti and,
I wasn't gonna say that.
Willow Run.
6.5 million of the 10 million went there.
Yeah, I mean,
Wasn't much left.
there wasn't much left to put out.
Way to incentivize.
And they were
the
all significant
practice.
awards. There were no small awards in there.
Wow.
There was only a handful of those given out in the 10 million. But yeah, 6.5 million went to one consolidation in southeast Michigan.
Now, when we get to bus replacement and that kind of, we're factoring all of that into this too, the increased miles that we're driving for Kingsley. So we're still saying that in essence, we're,
No, because they're Kingsley's buses, so we don't take that into consideration for our bus replacement. They own their own buses. We provide the management, drivers, and routing.
and they do their own maintenance and
Yes.
service and then replacement?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think it's an important note, because, you know, as you start to do these things, one thing that will be noted when we analyze our 1014 data and even our own budgets, it shows our transportation costs increased, you know, and so we have to know the context of that. That's offset by a corresponding increase in revenues, actually more than that increase in revenues. So you always got to take things in context when you look at numbers, especially when we do arrangements like this. Thanks again, Christine. I just don't want to miss the opportunity. This cannot be pulled off by average employees. I'm just telling you, an average person would not pull this off, and I really give you a lot of credit for what you've done on this contract.
Well, and I just really appreciate, as a board member, it's one more thing we can, you know, just out in the public, even last fall, when we were trying to convince people that this bond issue was important, that was a really big thing for me to be able to explain. We were so lean that we were able to win the bid for Kingsley's transportation operation. That's a really big thing. So I think it's definitely something to be proud of.
And I look at it as a bonus because it's not really outsourcing in my mind,
Right.
it's collaboration. So I think that's a benefit to the employees that were working for Kingsley, they're still in the public school system, so it's better than the outsourcing word that sometimes people are afraid of.
Are we still looking at the possibility, Ken, of food services as well? I mean, wasn't that at one point on the table?
It has been on the table, off the table. That is a evolving issue for Kingsley Schools, and we stand ready to discuss it with them at this moment in time. We're not ready to take over their operation, given the transitions that we're going to be going through with management here right now.
Okay.
But we do, of course, do Suttons Bay, as you know.
Yes, I know we do. We're taking over the world, well, at least Northern Michigan.
Watch out there.
Oh,
Yeah.
now we're gonna be in trouble again.
Yep.
That's-
Okay. The next topic, you want, I'm sorry, Eric.
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
Approval of athletic trainers. This is one that is analyzed closely every year. Our athletic directors work closely with Ken O'Brien in managing this contract, and we have a very good relationship with NMC. This has been an evolution over the course of years. Not too long ago, this contract was more than double the price that you're seeing. We have bid this in the past. We did not bid it this year, but we have taken this out for bid, and we have continually worked to keep the cost down here. And certainly when we have made budget reductions, some of those went directly to this trainer contract. There's a risk and reward there, obviously. I think people would feel more comfortable if we had more trainer time built in. But simply as we're reducing budget, we have had to scale that back. What was mostly cut off was the work at the middle schools. And certainly, you know, when there's twisted ankles or bruises and pulled muscles and stuff like that, you would like to have a trainer available to work there. But we've had to eliminate some of that. That said, we've been very satisfied, I would say, from a global perspective with our relationships, and have been able to work out things where we've had, you know, whether they're minor issues or not, we've been able to work them out. So both athletic directors and Ken recommended that we proceed. Obviously, as you can see, there's no cost increase to this contract.
So to clarify, Paul, what this contract does is it buys us a certain number of office hours where they are available to our teams, our schools.
Yep.
And if we had a reduction in this area, it would involve, you know, scaling back the hours that would be available to the
Correct.
school district.
That is correct. And then we have trainers available at certain high visibility and certain
Yeah.
high contact sports where they're there on site in case of an injury. Then they work with students who are injured, but again, it's been scaled back over the course of time, so yes.
Do we do any kind of drug and alcohol testing with any of the employees that are involved with athletics at all?
Yes, they're all.
Does Munson then do that over at MCHC, or do we do that, we have a private entity that does that?
Well, I should take that back. We do that if they brought a new trainer in, we would do all of our testing, HR testing, on that person. Afterwards, I don't believe there is any drug and alcohol testing.
Okay, just curious. Because
It'd be a question for Munson. I'm sure Munson must have some sort of protocol for doing that. I can ask that question.
well, we
and get back to you.
routinely in the business world use MCHC for drug and alcohol testing of new employees, so I just didn't know if that was part of the service. Okay.
If you like, I could find that out, if they get tested annually.
Because there's still an employee of Munson, right?
Yeah,
So they would have to abide by their HR policies.
Correct. The first year we enacted that contract, we did do our testing on them. There's been no turnover in that. I've been here 6 years, and they're the same two trainers, so.
Yeah.
I think that's good. Thank you.
The last item is on the action items is a nice donation that we got from the TC Track Club, and we have an excellent relationship with the TC Track Club. Our coaches work closely with them. We help share some facility and some storage there with them, and work throughout the year with the TC Track Club. And it's a nice donation to get $20,000 dedicated to both $10,000 to Central High School, $10,000 to West Senior High, to be used at the discretion of the athletic director to support girls and boys cross-country and track programs. And that's just a super gift that we've received, and as you know, in board policy, we acknowledge those gifts, and thank yous have been sent already to the track club from the athletic directors.
Yeah, this is a remarkably generous gift and another example of how our community and the organizations of the community help support and underwrite the extracurricular activities we're able to offer our kids.
Well, and it's wonderful that they're using our facilities, that's another way to bring people in to use the facilities. You know, whether it's for the Bayshore Marathon or the other projects, I think it's wonderful to have community members. I think the more they're in our facilities and see them and use them, they understand our needs and the benefit of having, you know, adequate facilities for our kids too.
Thanks for that. And a lot of credit for that goes to Adam Bevere, who works with all of these groups to make sure they have their needs met, make sure that the appropriate contracts are worked out relative to covering costs and abiding by the board policy that we approved last year. So Adam has done a wonderful job with that, has been a point person in that facility use, and it has been good. It's been a positive for our community. So.
We're pleased to pass that along.
Okay, awesome. Moving on to informational items, I'll start with the operations, and just note on the sale of Norris. There isn't a lot to update you other than it's kind of a status quo. I recently commented that the pace of this is to say that this is moving at a snail's pace is an affront to all snails. It's moving slower than that. Conversations, they may have said this before, it's a formal letter from our attorneys to the EPA, and it's 6 or 8 weeks of a response, and then another question. And the holdup at this point is basically the restrictions that the EPA is putting on the buyers. That's the summary of it right there. The buyer, rightfully so, is trying to get as many restrictions removed as possible before they sign on the dotted line. Once they sign, they're stuck. So you wouldn't expect them to sign without doing all the due diligence possible. We may be getting to a point that they're gonna have to say, well, we've done everything we can, and either these restrictions are what you live with or they don't, and I would hate to have to come back and say that, but this process has been 24 months now, and at some point, we need to fish or cut bait, they say. We'll see. We're really appreciative of the buyer. We're appreciative of our attorneys, but these attorney costs keep rising, obviously. And then again, these attorney costs are gonna be paid for with the sale of Norris, so it's not that it's gonna necessarily impact our general fund, unless, of course, it doesn't happen. And, so these are I guess that's business, right? Any questions, I guess I would say that's the summary of what's going on. Okay. Conveyance of the former Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad right-of-way. In case you want to see a picture of it, Paul will hold it up, and you probably know where this property is. This is right next to the Montessori school, and it's right along that right-of-way there, the roadway there. That property is now formally ours. It was state land, and it's been formally conveyed through a $1 purchase.
What are we gonna do with it?
Well, it's obviously, it's nice to have that piece for site development, right? Because this is a site that will be developed if the bond issue passes, obviously.
We're gonna run a railroad through there.
Well, because we just, what is the name of that street again? I forgot. Oh, that's right. So we just partnered with the city a couple of years ago to help cover costs to have that paved, right? Okay,
Yeah.
right.
So, here's our first challenge with the property, and I'm going to start beginning this process and work with Paul. That property is being used by Redmond Automotive, and they are using it for excess cars. So cars sit there. The city hasn't always been thrilled with that, but they haven't had a lot of just legal right to make them remove that. Now that we own that property, I believe that we have some responsibility to notify Redmond and notify them quickly of our intent there and ask them to remove that. And I'm gonna work with attorneys to do that. So FYI, we're gonna begin that, and I want you to know that. So again, because as we modify that site, whatever happens there, we can use all of that space somehow.
Right.
If necessary. All right?
Right, thank you.
Okay. The next item is an informational, because I just want you to know that it's out there. We have been notified that civil rights compliance audit, which is a random audit, that we're going to be subject to a civil rights compliance audit relative to our facilities and our policies. So policies and facilities will be looked at by the federal or state? So by the state. Paul Mahon will be our point person relative to facilities. Cindy Burke will be the point person relative to policy. This is new for us, but the ISD has some experience here, and it wasn't a pleasant experience necessarily for them. I feel good about this. Audits, I come from a CPA background, and an audit background are a good thing. We seem to get picked for them often, unfortunately, the random ones, but seems like this is a nice random audit to have. But, we'll be looking at, from a standpoint of facilities, certainly is, do we comply with ADA standards? And then you have to start looking at, what's grandfathered in and what's new code. So certainly not all of our buildings are up to quote-unquote new code, but they're grandfathered in. So to me, that means we're in compliance. How the audit addresses that is something we're going to learn. And that'll be something that certainly you will be getting a report on, and we'll be bringing updates to you. I'm not sure, Paul, have you got anything to add there with the timing of this and how long it's going to last or when it starts?
No, there's an explanation session. Cindy Burke and I will attend on June 14th a video conference from Northern Michigan here at NMC, where other entities who are selected also will be provided a full explanation of the process, how it's going to work, timetable of that. We have no information yet other than notification that we've been selected. So June 14th, we'll know a lot more.
We won that lottery, huh?
Yeah, we won. Yes, exactly. It's kind of like getting called for jury duty, maybe. Anyways, any other questions?
Thanks.
Moving right down the list here, surplus equipment sale. Want to make you, the next two items actually are lean projects that have been looked at by, Ken has had a role in both, and in this one, Adam certainly, all of our operations have had a role in both of these. We have surplus equipment scattered throughout the district, and when you look at that equipment and kind of it comes down to a perception issue. We are an organization, though, that operates with replacement cycles that tend to go 10 to 30 plus years. I mean, I don't know how old these desks are. I mean, at some point they'll have to get replaced, probably not soon. But even the chairs we sit on, we're multiple years before we finally replace them. They were all falling apart. At some point, that equipment exceeds its useful life, and we run out of use for it as a school system. We don't have an easy time disposing of that stuff. We have board policy along the lines, but it's like someone would suggest that old desk that's no longer functional that we would throw out. So what do we do with it? We put it somewhere. And then it piles dust, and it's there for years. That is the definition of waste. That's spot on defined excess inventory, in this case useless inventory, sitting somewhere taking up space. And it's not visible. Why? Because some of it's at Norris, some of it's at Old Long Lake, some of it's at Bertha Voss, some of it's sitting over at Saban, some of it might be in a closet somewhere in a building. What this process does is puts that waste, that inventory in one spot so it's visible. The magnitude of it's visible. If it's one classroom, you can kind of ignore it. If it's visible in a warehouse, now you do something with it. And this is an appropriate issue to look at. If you go on a Michigan State's campus, they have an entire, you can see it as you drive on, I forget what road that is, but you drive, equipment surplus. It's always on sale. They always have surplus equipment because, again, they have 30, 40-year replacement cycles, and for technology, lesser. If someone has use for it, why not get something for it? Collecting dust is waste. We need to dispose of it if it doesn't have value, or sell it if it has value. So that's the reason for that, and we want to make sure that there's visibility around this. Where's the continuous improvement process? We're just getting started. We want to have this not one event every 5 years. We want this to be a rolling issue, that maybe it's once every quarter, maybe it's once every year, half year, maybe it's online, and then maybe it's donation if there's no need. And we also want to make sure that if the equipment somehow has use for, in a building, that the buildings are able to see it, and they come by and say, you know what, well, that thing has only got 2 years left, and I could use it for something, and so we'll let that, and we have to monitor that, though, because we don't want someone to take it and put it in the corner of a classroom and then not use it, and then it gets piled up dust, and then we don't accomplish our objective there. So that's the nature of this. And I'd open, again, if Adam, if you had anything to add, or Ken, to that.
You nailed it.
But is this something that that the board would have to make a motion on or approve to be able to dispense of?
We have board policy along those lines, and at this point, for instance, anything less than, I believe it's $2,500, I look at Ken, $2,500 is basically at the superintendent's discretion to dispose of that. So we had to get rid of some shelving units that I think someone paid us $1,000 for, and we had a couple people look at it. Okay, just go ahead and sell that. By board policy, we're able to do that. At a larger magnitude, we have to have, Ken, do you want to describe what our policy is there?
Yeah, the policy says that anything that's $2,500 or more per item has to be approved at the board level. So, but what we're looking at doing is selling these things in bulk. You can imagine the amount of desks that we have and stuff like that. If we can get other school districts or school systems to look at them, pay us some money for them, that's better than getting zero for them. So that's really what we're looking at doing. And I don't think any of those would have to be approved at the board level,
Right.
because none of the per item costs would be over $2,500.
If we've got any $2,500 desks, I want to know about them.
Gold-plated.
Well, that's great. Sounds like a great initiative. Thank you.
And I really like, that was something that had come up before, that some teachers had mentioned that they didn't know, that the sale was happening, and they wish that they would have known, because they would have loved another table for their classroom. So I really like the timeline and the, of when things are gonna be available, and to invite staff to check it out first. I think that's a great, whether they want it or not, it's out there, and I think it's a great step.
And we certainly learned from those comments and want to create visibility around this situation.
So you are going to try and have one centralized location ongoing where these things could be previewed?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. The next item, two-way radio situation. This is where we are going to recommend that we modify our capital projects list to add a project, and we can fund it out of those contingencies that we get. It's not a lot of dollars relative to capital, but it came to our attention as I was having discussion with the supervisors of the various departments that report to me, and it was brought to my attention that we don't have good focus surrounding the process of our two-way radios. Who's in charge? We have the transportation department that uses them, the operations department uses them, the buildings make good use of them. Everybody was kind of doing their own thing. Then we had some, Rod Lowe's has a role in there. We had some technical advances that need to happen relative to some repeaters and these things, but we didn't have a focal point for it. And it really didn't take long for our discussion to happen, that we all kind of came to the same conclusion right away, that this simply is a lean process calling out for action. And because we have those tools, and really with Ken's expertise, he led us through, volunteered to lead a number of people through this. You can, review that report. And it is a safety and security thing, especially at the building level. I will tell you, I was removed enough from this that it was kind of like, it didn't even occur to me that we had this issue going on within our school system. But that is about getting to the front lines and getting to the users who are actively use these systems. And we explored a number of options. We certainly look at technology. We look at the future. Maybe there may, in fact, and down the road into the future, may be other ways to accomplish what the two-way radios accomplish. But right now, we think that there isn't. At this point, we need to continue to rely on this system, enhance this system. So in the event of an emergency, that we have, in the event of a breakdown in the electrical service, like happened last week, in the event of a major storm, something happens that knocks out electrical service, these things can still talk to each other. And what we found as we went through our process is that there's holes. We knew that. There was holes in interlocking, there's holes within buildings where you lose communication. We explored all that. This recommendation takes all of that into account as to what would solve that recommendation. $55,000 project on the capital side, an additional $6,000 operationally that we will cover from within current budgets, that will not require a budget adjustment to do. So, wanted to report that to the board, and you'll be seeing this formally on the critical projects list after our June meeting to our quarterly bond review.
This makes a lot of sense. I mean, as much as we rely on cellular technology or the others, I mean, things happen, and I think it makes an awful lot of sense to streamline this when possible.
Any other questions? Good, thank you. And I want to, again, commend the staff for thorough work on that project. Last thing is just an FYI on operational staffing. We have, I'm going to have a plan in front of you. I am kind of just prepping it right now that you know that Rod Lowe's has announced his retirement. We have begun planning for that transition and looking at what the fallout from that will be, or how we move forward in the most efficient and effective manner. I will tell you that there'll be some of Rod's duties that will be absorbed by current staff. That's obviously something that I think all of our expectations are when you have that type of an opportunity. You need to not jump to the solution of replacing that person in the same manner, but look to reorganize, and that's what we make it a habit of doing. We're in process of looking at that reorganization. We see at this point 2 holes in the process moving forward, and they're big holes. The indoor air quality. Rod Lowe's monitored that for us and addressed any concerns throughout this district that invariably pop up, about an indoor air quality issue. He handled it in a professional manner with data. He understands how to do the testing. He understands how to remediate any issues. That's something that we're going to be losing expertise that we have to make sure we plan for. The other one is the asbestos abatement. While we do have staff that are certified in asbestos removal, it's the identification of the project, the scoping of the project, that we're losing some expertise there and some certification relative to that. And we are actively considering how we address both those issues. Our plan that will be in front of you, hopefully in July meeting, at the very latest has to be in place in the August meeting. We'll address both of those issues and all the other issues that Rod is responsible for. But again, as it relates to, for instance, the fire drill, the drills that we have to do, whether they be for intruder drills, wind drills, whatever, we think we can move forward with that. We have some transitions with Sandra Scott. Ken O'Brien has some expertise relative to a history of working with first responders and police and fire. He's going to have a role in all that. Some of the other things like bidding on the trash removal, which Rod always handled, you can see that's a natural progression to change into our purchasing department and other operational staff. So I'll come forward with a formal plan in the next 2 months. Okay, now for the fun stuff. Can we pull the budget up? Is that next, or am I missing something?
I think.
Yes, food service director. Let me just mention the food service director search. We are down to 2 excellent candidates. Chris Davis and I are very pleased with both. Steve has been involved in the final interviews, and the last thing that we need to do is actually just get a meeting with Steve and try to just make a selection on the 2. So we will have someone in place this summer at some point. And we're down to 2 excellent candidates, and that's different than we went through last year. We didn't find excellent candidates. This year we found 2, and we are having a hard time choosing between 2. So that's where we're at. And I'm gonna hopefully have that done very quickly. It should have already been done. We're just gotta get to that and make it a point. So that's coming.
Great.
Okay, budget update. As Michelle's bringing this up, I want to talk about a couple things. From a high-level perspective, this is a high-level dialogue and a high-level presentation. There's going to be a lot of detail like we normally give. We're in process of compiling that. And I want to deliver the messages, they're the important messages that I think are important that you hear, and I don't want them lost in detail. And so we've made it a point not to give preliminary detail numbers. We can give them, but there's a overriding reason why I'm not giving them, is that the state of Michigan has not given us guidance on how to account for these new retirement monies and how they're coming in and out of our budgets. Even for the current year that closes in less than 30 days. Wes and Sandy are just waiting to hear, how do we account for this? It will substantially change the numbers, but not the bottom line of our budgets. So whether or not that has to be allocated across all functions, which we think it's going to have to be, how it's going to be allocated across functions, and how it's going to be recognized on the revenue side, are still not, we don't have formal guidance from the state. They have promised that we will have that guidance this week. That was the promise we got from the state. It's Wednesday, and I'm sure they're going to get it to us by Friday. So if I were to give you the detail, all of the numbers that you see, the next time you see numbers, would have changed. The bottom line is what I want to talk to you about on the budget. And I want to talk about three budgets. Let me just, and they're the general fund, the budgets that we have formally have to drop. General fund, community service fund, and the food service fund. Okay, I want to just, I'm not going to give you a long presentation. You know this is the first page of a long presentation. You're not going to get that. But I'm just going to point out that the status of pension reform, within the next 2 weeks, we still have to change all of our accounts, all the budgets throughout both accounts, 2 fiscal years, just to give you an idea of the fluctuation that's going to happen within the numbers that we're putting forward. What I'm struggling with is 2 things. One is that what I'm going to conclude on the community service fund is that we're going to end in a balanced position. It's going to be essentially balanced. And the community service fund is the LEAP program and the child care programs that Jamie has been talking about. We've talked at length about her approach from a business perspective. That her portion of the community service fund, child care, is going to finish essentially balanced. The budget will reflect a $35,000 draw on fund equity in the community service fund. We really think that's going to be very minimal when it's all said and done. The amendment went from $70,000 to $35,000. Bottom line is going to be close to zero when we close the books. That's excellent. As it relates to the LEAP side of that, there's a $185,000 budgeted transfer from the general fund. That's going to be more than enough to cover their excess costs. So what I'm going to say in the LEAP program, without getting into a lot of details, is it's making progress in the right direction. In fact, even though the original budget for next year is going to show no change, we feel that going forward into the future will probably be a budget amendment to show less of a drawdown for the LEAP program than what will originally be budgeted, therefore showing progress. So community service fund, set. Food service program, and this needs to be, I want to be clear about this, is going to show a deficit this year. We've talked about it. There's 3 major reasons for it. And in fact, I want to at least pass this out, and I guess that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start by talking about food service. You can come, I'm sorry about this, I wanted to make sure that this is communicated, and transparency is key for me, so I don't want it to ever look like we're not showing what we need to show. In the food service realm, in fact, one for Steve, and then I'll leave one for Scott here. The budget's going to reflect a $145,000 shortfall. 3 items contributing to that. One is a one-time change in the way that federal commodities are accounted for. And that is going to decrease the asset that we have on our books and will then be a charge against the program, or we won't be able to accrue as large of an asset as we've had in the past there. That will be something like a $30,000 to $40,000 portion of that $145,000 shortfall. And I'm looking at Sandy. Is that about right, Sandy? About $40,000 of the $100,000. The rest of the $100,000 is due to 2 main things. One's participation. You've known all year long that participation has been an issue. That has the change in food service requirements, healthy initiatives. We have had less, and that is something that's across the state. We know that participation is down. We're going to have to continue to work there. The second item, though, that's important is that we lost 10 days of sales. We have about $20,000 per day in sale, and we have a net margin there of something like about, doesn't sound like a lot, but maybe about 5% per day. So maybe $1,000 per day. Maybe it's a little higher than that. Actually, I think it might be more like 10%, so $2,000 per day, something like that. But again, that's margin that goes to offset overhead costs. And actually, when you look at the childcare program, they have the same problem. And so from a standpoint of them coming in very close to balanced, that's an additional indication that they're doing all the right things from a business perspective. So I wanted to be clear on the food service issue, and so that there is no surprise when the formal budget is presented to you that there's a drawdown in the current year on there. Now, we started the year with about $950,000 in fund equity, a drawdown of 140, which will probably be more like 110 to 120 when we get to it, when we close all books, is not something that puts the system in any risk. I don't like the direction of that, certainly, but we know about it, and we certainly are cognizant of it as we move forward. And I wanted to make sure that that's very clearly stated, and then to ask if there's any questions before I get into the general fund portion of this. Okay. One of my major goals, maybe I need to make this in a formal, put it in formal goals as I work with Steve, is that I never want surprises. Yeah, I never want you to look at something on June 24th, especially the Finance Committee, and say, I wasn't expecting that. That would be, to me, an indicator that I'm not doing my job and something that Steve and I would have to address. Not to say that never will happen, but it's something I'm very cognizant of. Now, we'll transition to the general fund. Closing out the current year, very similar to numbers that you've seen as we looked at our original amendment. In fact, this number has stayed the same from January, where we've modified some of these just a little bit. But the bottom line of $3 million, we took out a little bit of the projected variance so that we went from 1.7 to 1.5. This number definitely concerns me. We're gonna have to analyze this. For now, we'll continue with it. We'll see what the reality of it is, and if it has to be modified in our projections moving forward, we will do that. Right now, we're looking at about a 6.7 million ending balance and a drawdown of 1.5 million in our current. And I'll get to the structural piece of that as we look at the 2014 over the next couple slides. So this begins, again, this is very high level, begins looking at our 13-14 year. When you look at our total per pupil revenue, I'm adding all the things together, including the one-time monies that were in there. And, you know, because we know that our foundation amount was $69.66, but there was one-time monies for financial best practices, pupil performance, and the retirement system that essentially, since they were one time, they're eliminated. Now, what's happening is the legislature is reinstating them, so they become one time again. At what point do they stop being one time and begin? You know, I don't know. I think the legislature wants to hold back the ability to say, hey, that was one time in case the revenue picture gets murkier for them. So we eliminated those, and now let's look, what are we putting back in? The one thing that looks to be structural is the $60 into our foundation based on a 2X formula. So that looks to be structural, so that our foundation amount will go from $69.66 to $60.26, if I did my math right. But then there's some more.
70-26.
Thank you. I didn't do my math right.
That would be a huge loss.
That would be a huge loss.
By the way,
Thank
that
you.
was a surprise.
At one time, they're putting back in the financial best practices. This is, we'll have to look at them. They look similar to last year. There's some dashboard stuff, but we have to look at to make sure that we meet those. We will be studying those over the course of the summer and make sure that they're implemented in plenty of time that we can certify to the state again by the fall. Maybe, I think last year we did it in December, that we have met those best practices and can avail ourselves to that money. Pupil performance. I want to note this is one that we'll have to pay attention to. The state does not have a good track record of being accurate in identifying this money. In fact, their track record is that they've told folks that they're getting it, and then they didn't get it, and they've told folks that they're not getting it who got it. We are trying to get to the data so that we have a better understanding of this. We're getting closer to it. I think we're probably as close as anybody in the state. What's funny is if you talk to superintendents, I'm not really sure how you call the state. That's a different department. Well, I have to transfer you to someone else. Well, I'm not the one that works on that. And you just realize that this money, which is vitally important to a school system, someone who I don't think, my personal opinion, is getting proper scrutiny over the methodologies and things that are happening, is giving the numbers out. So we are paying very close attention to this. The state has told us at this point that we are not getting this money. We think there's reason to not listen to that at this point because they haven't used the latest math scores and they have a history of not having it right. And I think it needs to be vetted out. And we will know for certain in the fall. We'll bring that back to you in the fall. It could actually increase if we have elementary reading in addition to high school, or it could decrease if we have only elementary reading, or whatever. There's 3 items that it's based on. So I want to point that out. That's the one that we will need further discussion on, and we'll need to certify that. We will not have bottom line closure on that item until probably fall, maybe late fall on that. Steve, do you have anything to say on there?
Yeah, it took them till, it was, we were well into November when that got corrected last year. The way that they're figuring the allocations is on a slope based on, at the high school level, 4 years of previous performance, where they take all of the MME scores and look at what percentage of the student population actually passed all of them and was proficient in all of them. And then they graph that out over 4 years and look at the slope of that. And if you're on or above the state average of that slope of improvement, you get the money. If you're below that, you don't. At the high school level, we're 3/100ths off. At the elementary level, it's 3/100ths, 4/100ths, and 9/100ths. And so one of those is math, and depending on what happens once they fix the math tests, we're so close that we may go above that. So we've had, we're just right below the state average, and if you look at the list, there's a lot of high-performing districts in the state who don't get anything, and part of that's because if you have higher scores, it's more difficult to meet that slope than it is somebody. But then there's other districts that are high-performing that have relatively high scores or high scores who actually met the slope. I mean, so it's really difficult to determine, if my criticism of this, I think it's a much better system than they've had in place before. I think my criticism of it would be the average makes no sense. They should have a predicted slope of improvement, and then which they could easily figure out for everybody individually if they wanted to, or they could do it based on what you thought a year's growth looked like, and then reward it based on that. This is sort of this makes no sense doing it on the average.
So you could have slow, methodical growth and basically get these payments every year,
Yes.
rather than trying to accelerate that progress and hit your thresholds and then.
And then all of a sudden you stall a little bit because you've made such growth, and then
Right.
you don't get the money.
Or you
And
could start out really, really in a really bad situation and just make the state average
Yes.
growth,
Yeah.
and other districts that have been doing marvelous things for years
Right.
aren't gonna get them.
Right.
And it's even more, that's true even more so at the elementary and middle school levels on the math and reading, because they only use 1 year to 1 year. Whereas at high school, it's a little different.
And they're using MEP scores for this?
Yeah, they're using MEP scores at the elementary, and
Do they know how bad their own test is and unpredictable it
Uh,
is year to year?
that's never been a concern of the
Well,
State Department.
plus they're having to regrade it and take questions off, and
Right.
so you don't even have the real
Plus they
data.
recalibrated it too.
June
haven't
Yeah,
they?
I think they weren't even, is it June or July? I forget when they're gonna actually be done with that regrading.
We were
so-
told that they would release them, they thought the mid to end of June.
Oh, good.
And, but that's why we don't believe that they're actually in those calculations, because those calculations came out even before they announced they had a problem with the math test. So, at least publicly. And so we don't think that they're in there, and that's why, and like I said, they put this list out last year, right around the same time, and it was it got totally adjusted later on. I mean, school districts locally that were gonna get $70 per kid got nothing. And then others that were gonna get nothing got 40. So, we'll see it, but it could end up being a one-time hit to us. Our data shows, we're not quite there yet, but I think our data shows that it'd be a one-time hit. Our slope would actually, particularly where math is increasing, once that gets in there, we'd be.
The other part to understand on the high school side of it is that the data that they're looking at, it's not 1-year-old data. It's 2-year-old data that has slopes from the prior 3 years before that. So it's a 4-year slope ending, so in 14, the slope ends in 2012, if you understand what I'm saying.
They're
So
not
you're-
using the most recent.
Right, so 13 isn't even in the
They're
question.
ones who keep saying we need to use data in all of our decision making.
Yeah.
It just doesn't matter how relevant.
I hope they're in a continuous improvement process, because I think Steve and I would agree that holding, accountability or incentives for this makes sense, but it doesn't make sense to say what you did 2 years ago, because it's not an incentive anymore. Now, if we could catch up to it and understand it, maybe we can do some multi-year
Yeah,
planning.
and a
around it.
slope of improvement is I think is a good measure. As a matter of fact, we're talking about how we're gonna use the same slope and create it for all of our buildings so that we can show where that is. I think the problem is using an average. That doesn't make any sense. That's not a performance standard. You can predict what you think the slope should be based on a year's growth and use that slope for every district. And that could be, that's much more, now, the problem with that is you can't do that with the MEP. Because the MEP doesn't give any indication unless you fake it, that it has some sort of annual growth. Now, the NWA, something like that, gives a statistic that shows annual growth, but that's probably why they're not using it that way. They're probably using the average because the MEP doesn't really have that available. The 3rd grade test doesn't mean anything to the 4th grade test. So,
So we need to get our data back for how we did in the spring. Will the slope change between now and the determination of whether or not we make it? So are there 2 moving data points? I mean, we can improve and step up, or can they average either drop down or step up even more?
not by the time the money would be released, so after October 1st, the only data point that could change would be in the math at the elementary and middle school level in regard to them adjusting those scores because they take the questions out that weren't supposed to be in there. And, that may or may not help us. We'll have to see.
I think theoretically it could do both things, though.
Right.
It could increase ours, or it could decrease the average. I think theoretically that's out there.
Because that's what I was wondering, if the average.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure, yes, it could. It could change the slope. Yeah,
Good.
could change it either way, decrease it or increase it.
Oh, good, this is fun.
That's the one part of this that has uncertainty. Everything else is pretty darn certain, at least as certain as state budgets can be. The $63 in retirement, that's pretty certain. There might be modification, that could be a couple dollars one way or the other. Last year, for instance, we were expecting 103, we got 98. So there could be that kind of swing in that $63. Equity payment, the one time's pretty much right in there in the statutory language, so that should be there. Which would, if all that comes true, is $75 increase per student. Better than a decrease, certainly. What's that?
Plus or minus 50%.
Yeah, plus or minus 50%.
For 1 year.
Yeah, that's true. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's still better than where we were
Yeah,
what we were
well,
looking
Yeah.
at, 2 months ago.
Well, and hey, they get it to us sort of in June instead of October,
Yeah.
so what are we complaining about?
It's a black number. It's different than what we were looking at you're right, in April, less than 2 months ago, right. So here's the total black number there. 767 is total if you kind of take the increase of the $75 plus hey, this is good news too. I mean, this is good news. This is not a negative number either. It's not a huge positive number, but it is not a negative number. Obviously, we're always looking at that number. It can change over the course of time between, I don't think it's gonna change between now and our budget unless Chris Davis comes up with hey, there's this or that. I would say that, we will know for certain in the fall, obviously, when the butts are in the seats, so to speak. Okay.
Do we know who those 2 students are?
We do, we've got them identified. No.
Make sure they get this.
This has not been changed, and we know that this probably will change, so there is a little something that is a conservative estimate, we should say, probably will be adjusted upward when we know final numbers there. So that's a conservative amount that stays in the current year. That includes all the different ISD revenues. This technology and your superintendent understands accounting and the implications of this stuff even sometimes better than myself, as he kept prompting me that you're not recognizing the 100,000 one-time carryover from the current year appropriately. The net is that we have 100,000 new costs next year, but we have, if you look at current year and next year, we have $200,000 to cover that. So that's a $100,000 benefit. I'm showing it this way. There's other ways that we could show it. We could show no revenue next year, but 100,000. This just grosses up the revenues and shows the expense, which is the appropriate and is reflected in the budgets as we move forward. So now the assumptions on the expense side speaks volumes. We do have a step increase budgeted. The retirement rate, which we've talked about ad nauseum, is increasing, 0.5% increase over the current year. We're estimating it to be 25. We no longer have a set rate. It is a rate that is combined over the course of many different options. We've put 25% across the board, and that's probably reasonable. I think over the course of the next couple of years, we know for sure it's going to go up next year. I think based on the blend of people, it's going to go up even more until we get the unfunded liability under control, at which point somewhere out there, and this is credit to this legislature because they get no credit for it now, somewhere way out there, 20, 30 years, this thing goes down really dramatically.
But right now,
But
we're
right
paying
now.
more for the newer hires and the people newer to the system than we
Correct.
are for, so it's sort of reverse of what one would think.
Exactly.
In 2 years, there'll be two things that'll adjust that rate in the next 2 years. First of all, the early retirement buyout that they put in, that comes off. That's about 1.6% of the cost right now. So, or 1.6 points. It's more than 1.6%, it's 1.6 points. That'll come off 2 years from now. I think after this year, there's 2 years left.
Right, so it's 2 or 3 years from now.
Yeah. So, and then the other one is the money that's in the escrow
A
that,
decision has to be made.
there has to be, yeah,
Yeah.
that can't go on forever. And that will significantly impact, when that money goes into the system, that'll significantly impact the rate. So, and I think that that's gonna happen, that's gotta happen in the next year. It's just been sitting there too long. And,
Can't sit on $500 million and just continue to sit on it without coming to some conclusion as to what you do about it.
yeah, I mean, at some point, they're gonna get sued because they haven't done anything to answer the question with people who have that money invested in an account.
Still being collected.
Yeah?
No, that money is not being collected.
Oh,
That's
that's
been
right.
stopped. That money is now escrowed. The 3% continued under a different mentality. So they're still collecting the 3%, but not under that 500 million auspices. Right. Got
And
it.
that 3%,
Goes to healthcare.
yes, the question is that 3% going into the system, or is that being held up because there was an injunction put on, was the injunction put on that was filed earlier this year?
I'm losing. I
thought
knew
one
that at some
dropped
point.
out Because it was filed originally by the same,
Right.
it was under the same judge, but I think that it didn't, because there was the other department, the other pension fund that had a different question.
Yeah, and I think what they are waiting on is to see if they can combine the two on our side, the current 3% question and the old 3% question,
Right.
whether they can't put those into one decision. So I don't know if it's going into the system right now or not. That's you know?
Well, I know that it's not. I know that the 500 million is being considered separately from the other question related to the current 3%, and that they formulated that to be directly beneficial to the individual as opposed to going into the system and didn't have a direct impact, and that was a reason over here. I have known the details of this, and right now it's escaping me, but I know that 500 million is separate from the current 3% question.
Yeah, that's not my question. My question is the 3% currently being taken out? That goes to the individual actually going in the system, because there was a lawsuit filed on that.
Yes, that is going into the system.
So they haven't put an injunction
No,
on
they
that?
have not put an injunction on
Okay.
that. Correct.
Because what I had heard
Right.
before was that they were gonna try and combine those two questions together for the court to consider, even though they have separate issues.
So more to come on that. We've put health insurance at actual increases. And then we have other structural adjustments that will, and the health insurance actual, I should say, is a very, I'm comfortable saying it's break even. It's close enough to break even that I'm comfortable with that. It might be a little savings, it might be a little more, but it's not a substantial percentage one way or the other that changed relative to what your census was, whether it's single, full family, or two-person. Those numbers changed in different directions, but bottom line, and Wes, do you have an idea there, or do you?
Yeah, it seems like it's pretty flat, I think.
Do we have the dental and vision quotes in yet, or just the health insurance, health part of it?
Just the health that I'm aware of.
That's what I thought, and I think, those came in pretty good, I think.
Yeah.
It's the question on how much the dental and vision will actually go up, because I think those are predicted to go up, not to go down.
They're a very minor portion
Yeah.
of that, so it wouldn't have a.
Huge impact.
No.
Okay, now, for other structural adjustments, this page encompasses the big picture of things that happen. We've mentioned at this meeting before that we have lost the special ed transportation dollars through the quote-unquote hold harmless reimbursement, because the $700,000 that we do spend to the ISD is not the direct expenditure of that program. The ISD claims all of the costs and is reimbursed the 70%, which we don't get. We used to get $181,000 based on our $1.7 million in expenditures. And because now the $700,000, and I think the theory we went forward with, it seems like we're spending $700,000, we should be able to claim $700,000. It doesn't work that way in the state's eyes. And so. They give all of that to the ISD. Right, they give all of it to the ISD, right. So and it is a negative, certainly, from our perspective here, but when you look at the big picture, that modification we made to special ed transportation, we originally thought it was saving us $1 million. Now it's saving us only $820,000. I mean, it still was the right decision. It's just that we overbooked, so to speak, the savings that we were gonna get there. We saved $820, not $1 million.
But
But
the
we-
expenses have also gone up
So,
significantly.
so expenses have gone up. Yeah, exactly. Go
But
ahead.
we really did save the $1 million the first 2 years because the ISD put the money
Yes,
in
thank
to
you.
cover us.
So the ISD
So
covered
we
it for
did
2 years.
realize $1 million, and then I think the other thing is that the ISD's not getting this 181. This is 181 that nobody's getting, right?
Well, correct. Instead, the state basically, instead of
We're not letting anybody claim that.
well, I'm gonna say that the claim that we used to have for $1.7 million,
Yeah.
they reimbursed 181. Now the ISD is claiming 2.4 million and getting the reimbursement of 70%. So I kind of think the 181 is buried in that 70% reimbursement that they're getting. Two different ways to look at it, but that's how it's part of the reimbursement that the ISD is able to obtain that we're not able to obtain.
Right, but if truly the material number of 181 was buried within the ISD's reimbursement, then it would be coming back to us as a form of a savings. And what I'm saying is, that's not true. These were costs that neither could be in that, nor we could claim because they're doing the 70%.
True.
And so this money doesn't exist someplace else.
That's true.
That somebody else has it.
That's correct. That's
Okay,
correct.
yeah.
Okay. Unless you want to say the state has it, because now they don't have to
Well,
extend it. That would be
they-
the
the state has it.
The state has it, okay.
I could live with that.
Yeah, okay, the state, okay. At the utilities, it's just that we have done yeoman's work. We continue to do it relative to electrical, natural gas. We had to make an adjustment to electrical back in January. We are, I'm not sure where the latest information still is that we are the most efficient and effective per square foot school system relative to our utilities. We can't keep up, and this is I'm gonna look to Wes, this is for water and sewer?
Water and sewer, yeah, we've been kind of, the last several years, not quite making it, so made the adjustment in the 14 budget to bring it up to actuals.
Part of a $1.9 million budget, and water and sewer, we just haven't kept up with the cost of that. And, we take everything seriously. And again, Rod Lowe's, I recall, he looks directly at all of the utility bills, including the water bill. Ken will be taking on those responsibilities. But he noticed that there's, even a spike of $1,000 in the water bill at one of our elementaries. What's going on? Went over there and found that a water system that they were using for new plants was just continually running but was able to stop that. You know, without Rodlows looking at that stuff, we would have been spending thousands of dollars instead of 1 month of too much, you know. Anyways, we have to make sure we have those things in place. Retirement, we talked about, this is the dollar impact. We talked about the percentage impact. This is the dollar impact of retirement costs structurally increasing, going from, quote, about 24.5% to about 25%. Montessori at Cortade, the expansion of that program is going to cost us a new teacher. So as we look at expanding that and hopefully, you know, and we're taking a business model approach to all of these new programs, and we really are, one of the summer projects that I have is to formalize these business, and Jane is part of this too, at the direction of Steve, Jane and myself, formalize our business models so that as we grow these programs, we can make, you know, decisions based on continuing the program or eliminating the program based on the return on the investment that we're getting. This is bringing in students that we hope, and you can see we have gone from a slope downward in population to an even out, maybe a slight increase, and we need to analyze the impact of these programs and then impact the bottom line impact these programs have. So we'll be more of that coming. World language, we're implementing at 1 level this year, not 2 levels. That's in the budget this way. Had it been 2 levels, it would have been $250,000 cost here. Instead, we're putting 125. And technology, as we have presented to the board prior, two technicians to hire to manage the expansion of our technology. You saw the $200,000 in revenues. One of them one time that was going to cover that, and then we also have another $10 per student coming next year based on the preliminary budgets, or the budgets being soon to be signed, I think, by the governor. I think they've definitely passed the House. If they passed the Senate.
They're at the governor's desk.
They're at the governor's desk. Okay. Okay. One-time cost we have to put in there for the election. Off-year election, we've looked at this over the course of years, what our average has been in spending. It's about $30,000. And then you just heard about the technology information system, the $120,000 for the system itself, $40,000 for training, and certainly if there's any other questions, Todd's here for that. We talked about this earlier. Okay. Again, this is the stuff that's in that bottom line. What does it look like when we put it in there? This beginning fund equity, you saw the 6.7. Here's where the budget is. Here's the 3.1 million. Now, this is not 1.5 like the prior slide. It's 1.7 because on the prior slide, we took 200,000 out because we already did it. We already made the adjustment. We took that out and put it into the budgeted expenditures, or actually took it out of the budgeted expenditures, so we know that there won't be as much of a variance. At this very early stage in adopting a budget, this has been a safe number. We need to continue to look at it because it's something that scares the heck out of myself, Sandy, and Wes, for sure. We sweat about it when we talk about it in our offices, but so far it has served us well over the course of years. As this fund balance has decreased, which we're going to talk about shortly in the metrics that we're going to have for our district goals, you know, this number becomes more important. So we'll be looking at that. So a projected shortfall right now, 1.3 million. Of this, you just saw very clearly 200,000 of it was one time. There's actually other one-time items within the budget that have to do with carryover at building levels and department levels that move this projected shortfall to about $1 million structurally. Okay? I think we all understand that piece. It's a $1 million structural situation that we have moving forward. What are some variables that could impact the 2013 year end? We still are waiting on the completion of any ISD revenues. We don't have the full, amount in the current year from the ISD that we have budgeted. We are about $500,000 short there, but we're waiting on things to play out. The variance that we talked about on the 1.5 million is another variable. 14, accounting for MERPSers. Actually, I should have had that on both slides, but that's a neutral impact. It just changes all the numbers, but doesn't change the bottom line. Number of students could be a plus or a minus. Methodology for counting students. You may know that they're changing the methodology for counting students. It's no longer, so we won't truly know the number of students until next March. And as long as the audit is done by next March, it might even be April, till we truly know how many students we have next year, because the count's going to be based on fall and winter of next year, not the old way of current year winter and next year fall.
I think they're gonna save good money on this.
The state? Yeah. I think they're going to save money for sure. I hope that we gain. You know, I hope. We'll see. There's some other issues relative to how schools bill each other for students. And that's really gonna change a dynamic within school districts. I'm not sure how that's all gonna play out. We're gonna see about that over the course of time, and it's section 25, and I don't even know all the details of it. I know Sandy Lowe is dealing with it, works with Mary Beth on students coming and going, and what other districts do to charge us for portions of their foundation amount. Actual retirements, I think actual retirement costs as it relates to percentage, I think that really only has one direction to go, and that's negative. I don't think we're gonna have a positive from the 25%. But I think 25% is a very good estimate now. The health census, whether people choose full family, you know, that kind of thing, that can change now, that the billing is based on that. Assumption for best practice, which we think are gonna get in student performance, we talked about that. We know we're gonna get best practice, student performance, we had that discussion. Contract settlement, I only see, if I were to put a plus here, it would mean that we were going with something less than 0%. That's not gonna happen, just to be realistic, that's out there already on the website as the proposal. So, ISD revenues, that I think is a positive, that's gonna happen to our budget. And, replacement teacher costs, that depends on the retirements, plus or minus there, we have that calculated into the budget, but that's an estimate and it can go either way. Those are the high-level things I see happening. That list may or may not change for the next 2 weeks. If we have more information on whatever items that we have, we'll build those into the budget that we present to the full board. That's the high-level look at the general fund. Questions? Good. Well, good, I'm glad I'm through that. Not good that there's no questions. I'm always open to more questions. Very quickly on upcoming calendar items, they are noted in your packet. The finance, the quarterly bond review, I'm not on the page. Does anybody on?
Friday?
Is it this, when is that? June 13th, Thursday, 10:30 to noon.
That's right. Yes, great.
Always welcome board members to that. Obviously, I'd love to know that you're coming in advance, but welcome at all times. That's where we talk about fine line item detail of every single project that we have. Bruce Dunn will be joining us at the next Board Finance and Operations Committee, which is next year. Next fiscal year is the last meeting of the fiscal year. It's crazy how that goes. We're gonna have a New Year's Eve party on June 30th, so anybody wants to join us in the business office. And we'll ring in the new fiscal year on July 1.
I'll bring the hats.
Crazy group.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, we celebrate with 10-key race. Who can add the numbers the fastest? With that, I'm turning it over to the last item for discussion, which is on district metrics. That we have had discussion. Thanks, Scott. Okay, we have had discussion. You have had discussion with Steve. Steve has had discussion with executive team as we move through the metrics that are going to be identified for measuring performance versus the strategic plan. I believe there's 7 of them that we're focused on at the board level, 2 of them directly related to this committee. And from that perspective, I know that Steve will be moving into a retreat with you guys within the next couple weeks.
Next
And
Thursday.
Next Thursday.
Right after the bond review.
Right after the bond, so you can join.
Long
It's
day.
exciting. I'm not sure
Exciting
what
day.
meeting's more
That's right.
exciting. And I think that what Steve would like is that you as a committee, present these metrics moving forward and identify what metrics based on discussion that has already occurred and then now discussion that you'll have now that you want to use to support the indicator of success. So I think I misspoke when I said that you have 7 metrics. There's 7 indicators of success, and you want to identify what metrics support those indicators. And the 2 indicators that relate to this committee are the fund balance. was talking to Steve, I don't think we need to make that more complicated than it is. I think there's three very good measures that have been identified, and certainly this is your discussion, not mine, but I'll give you my feedback that it seems straightforward and understandable, at least to me, but now I'm the CFO of the school system. This is your discussion. Those identified metrics are current level of fund equity, direction of equity over time, and then the future direction. Then the other one is related to our capital planning, and I think there's where there's more complex nature there, and you have all the metrics in front of you. From here, I'm introducing, and I can facilitate discussion and about this if you'd like, but I'd really kind of like to hear your direction on this and then decide
Well,
where to go from here.
I think the fund equity one, the metrics are very clear, and I don't know what we would add, and I think the future direction is important to include, so there's not really anything to take off there. The next one is, I think, something that we've talked about before at our retreat, but there are a lot of metrics under that one particular thing, and that's just something that we've been struggling with, that's a big question, and how do you get at it without including lots and lots of different points?
And you could, there's no magic number.
Right.
It's what's the picture that would be.
Is more better, though? Or
You
is it
know,
not enough?
you want three, anyway, because you want three that triangulate the data, inform on each other, but you can have more than that. It really comes down to, as a board member, when you look at it, what do you think you'd have to put together, at least to start, and we'd obviously continuously improve, that would tell you enough of a story about performance that you feel like you could evaluate program. That's really what it comes down to. And there's no specific one. Some of these take more than others, just because of the nature of them. This is a big one. There's a lot of stuff that goes into this one. What we'd like to see is, when I talked to Kelly about setting up the retreat agenda, was if each committee that has one of these major ones can come out with a recommendation, with the rationale for why we think this is a good place to start, to the rest of the board, and then the rest of the board will kick it around with you guys and make that final decision.
So for the first few, we're talking about the capital planning and the percent on time, the percent within budget, percent spent directly supporting learning environments. So that alone seems like it has to be, that would have to be pretty well defined, is what's.
I would say in the first three are very objective
Right.
in nature, very objective. And then I think as you go down the list, there's subjectivity brought into the picture. And then at least some of them, for myself, would need, it doesn't readily come to me exactly how we would come up with metric. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do that. I'm not saying that at all. It would take some dialogue. The first three are very simple.
Well, and the other one is, for example, the percentage of students participating in the One to World program.
Hmm?
Well, if the parent has already provided a computer, are we then going to count that as a negative to our, that's a negative metric because, 25 parents this year provided a computer and only 2 last year did? So
Or do
I
we
mean,
count elementary computers that are provided by families as a positive?
right,
Well, that begs the question as to whether measuring the number of devices is really relevant.
that's what I mean.
Right.
Is that worth putting on, or is that something we could eliminate? It's great that we're offering it. Todd really wants to talk.
Well, I was just gonna say, I don't know that, I don't know if the number of devices is really good as a metric. I think it's good as information. If we're talking about, how much access we're providing to kids or how much support or whatever. But it's difficult as a metric because it does vary. For example, the adoption rate for One to World of the senior class right now is lower by far than what it was for the freshmen. Freshmen, it was class this year after it's about 95%. And for seniors this year, I think it was somewhere in like 82%. And there's a number of reasons why. I mean, certainly part of it is that a lot of them do have something else that they brought from home, but it's also too, they were the first year of the program, and there was just kind of, I don't know, it's just not necessarily buying in as much. You know, kids are as much as just, they're people like anybody else, and they're kind of like, you know what, I know how school works, and I'm comfortable with it continuing that way as much as anybody else might say that, so. I don't know, there's lots of little factors in there, so.
It comes down to what do you want to measure?
Mm-hmm.
So if we wanted to measure that all kids had access to devices so that they could go virtual during the day, then the One to World program as a facilities plan would be part of that. And all you'd be measuring, you wouldn't be measuring how many devices you gave out, you'd be measuring that every kid had something. If part of the facilities plan was to measure how the facilities plan impacts student learning, now we can say, okay, that's a different way to look at it, and now one-to-world, one-to-one computing becomes something that's intended to give kids access to information that we would assume would increase the pace and the way in which they learn, and we can measure that. And so that would still come back as a statistic around One-to-World as part of the facilities plan. And, you know, that could be a whole separate measure around the impact of technology on learning. And that could be one of the pieces that goes into there, where those first three that are very objective, you know, my question on the first three is, do they inform each other?
Right.
You know, so when we look at take the three that we have looked at and we'll go forward with in regard to literacy, graduation, and those standards. And you take student performance, proficiency, distributed, you take student growth, and you take level of performance of staff. Because those three things inform each other and start to tell a story. And begin to show us at a very high level patterns that explain things that we can dig deeper into. I mean, because the intent of those big metrics is that the staff then can go back and dig into them and find out the rest of the story. And so do you have three metrics there that are objective that inform each other the way that those three metrics do over here on the teaching and learning side?
Well, that's really my point, is if we can get rid of things that aren't really helping and it's just measuring to measure, and it may not be giving us the best indication, or if we need to change it, then let's change it. But at this point, I don't believe that the percentage of students participating in the One-to-World program is the best measure of this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, and you might come back to something like that later and say, I mean, part of putting metrics in place, performance metrics, is not just that you're going to start measuring something, but it also tells you what you are missing measuring.
Right.
Because it starts to tell the story, and then you go, yeah, but we're really not asking this question.
Well, and I think the next couple of the percentage of curriculum materials available online 24/7 is important, but the next one, if students aren't accessing the online materials, it doesn't matter how much time our staff is spending creating them. So I think those two are very, very important. And the more hits, I would assume that means that there's better quality and there's more, you know.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Eric?
No, I agree. I think the percent students example is one that maybe somewhere down the line, when we know that we're nailing what we're doing and the interaction and the use of the technology and our online programs are spot on, then maybe to go from 82 to 95 or stretch it, you know, down to younger ages, and to get that extra percentage, get that extra exposure, that we get bang for every dollar we spend there. But right now, we probably don't know. I don't think we can say that's where the biggest gains are, because I think other things need to be measured first. One thing, to state the obvious, but I mean, depending on what we pick, we could bias the direction of the capital programs towards
Right.
technology versus facilities versus, and because as far as I can tell from my recollection, that's where we're getting at capital program. This is the data point, or the data point. These are the data points.
Well, for that, anytime, any place, any way, teaching and
Yeah,
learning. So instead of having, anytime is, during these hours, or maybe we're extending, we're changing facilities. Is that the question, is that maybe we're changing facilities to adapt to, having class at 2 a.m. if that's when kids really want to be there?
that is, well, and this is taking up a big bite, what we're trying to capture
Right.
and measure
Well,
here.
Right.
And also that
Potential.
you have to have the buildings available for when, even as we change the way we gather kids and teach, they still have to be available during the day
Right.
for people who still need that mode. And so you still have to invest there. So it kind of it encompasses what we're doing now, and then how we might change things in the future. That whole conversation we had at Willow Hill in regard to libraries. And, it's hard to predict a future more than 5 years out where we are still having most of our kids select their reading material from something other than a virtual space that downloads it onto a device. It just probably isn't gonna happen that way. I mean,
So maybe this is just not the right way to look at it, but the first one on there, the projects complete from those identified in the capital plan. It's not very often that we're not on time, and it's not very often that Paul doesn't have his budget nailed, right? So to me, it's like, well, yeah, that's just gonna happen. I know we need to measure it, and that just makes it easier to measure it because we're 99% sure it's gonna happen. But that projects complete from those identified in the capital plan, what are we trying to get at there? It's just that those quarterly bond reviews are well thought out, and this is a long-term plan,
Yeah, I
and
think-
we don't alter from that plan. That's really what we're trying to say with that.
And I think it shows a pacing of the projects. I think that shows a certain pace.
I think too, if you think about what occurred in 2008 and how that was an external
Right.
issue that impacted our ability to get projects done on
Right.
time that were
That's true.
slated, there was some continuous improvement that we went through this time in looking at how we would actually put the numbers in based on that experience. So I think that even from a practical, logical perspective, that there's value in that metric, simply because we've had an experience where big chunks couldn't get done that were slated to be done because there was a major variable we didn't control that changed.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense. I appreciate the explanation there.
And I would say on the other two that, I hear what you're saying. I mean, those ones were relatively certain. Now, it would be a big deal if they didn't come in that
But
way.
we have
So
to keep them in.
yeah, so I mean, it's something that we have to know about, and certainly if we ever didn't meet this at a very high level, very close to 100%, then we would be having to look at what we're doing. But I don't think that the information informs each other, like what Steve was asking, and that there needs to be some triangulation of some sort. And I can think of this: standards. What are industry standards? What are regional standards, national standards relative to project cost? Because if all your projects cost a lot more than the standard, but you're under budget, I don't know that that's a good thing. So I think you can form it to say, not only are we budgeting below industry standards and completing these projects below industry, that they're on time within budget, but they're below industry standards. I think that informs
And that's
another variable.
And that's just, the last 2 meetings we've had our architect in, and I think that was really, really important information, and I think it's also important information for the community. As we're going out there, we're not building the most expensive elementary schools in the state, and we actually fall well below the median, and this is what we're doing. So I personally would prefer to see something like that, that's more,
Yeah.
more
I like
tied.
it.
Well, and I think I'll go back, I think at least 2 of these do inform each other, as long as you have standards attached to them. Because if you were getting all your projects done, within budget, but in order to do that, you were extending the timelines way out, that tells you a story about how you're performing, and then, because what this is supposed to do is tell us how to get better.
Right.
And then it's just the opposite. If you were getting them all done well within the timeline, but you had to up the amount on every project to get it done, and these go right to the conversations we've been having about the next bond, it tells us about our performance and where we go back to say, where's the problem? And sometimes you come back from that and go, that's the way it had to be. But at least it tells us where to go back and start looking at our performance data, especially if there's standards tied to it that we can throw the spaghetti against the wall on, to measure it.
Yeah.
So how would one, because I really like the idea of having those sort of outside measures and something to hold it up against. Would we incorporate this, that, regional standards right into these lines?
Sure,
That's
sure.
another item.
I would say so.
Okay. What about I'm trying to figure out how to actually measure that fourth piece, the capital dollars spent directly supporting learning environments. I always ask Paul when what was it, the IDEA or the stimulus money or whatever that came through, and then they wanted us to track how many jobs it created and all this other stuff. And I was like, you're gonna have to create a couple more jobs just to track how many jobs you created. This doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense. So on that fourth one, how are we gonna measure it? How do we get to it? Because it sounds fancy, but
Again, I think there's subjectivity go along with that, because I think there's, I think there's connection to the classroom at all levels. So, we say capitals directly supporting learning environments, what are you trying to get at there? I can go through, I think it's a bit large discussion. I think it's a large discussion. Does that mean the building of the classroom? What does the principal's office mean then? What is the principal's office? Does that not? Or is that a support function that's close enough that you can say that creates directly a classroom? Same with the heating, the heating and the cooling systems within the structure. I mean, what word?
Mechanical rooms.
The mechanical rooms, is that direct instruction or not? That kind of stuff. So I don't know how you would get at
Well,
that.
I think there's ways to get at it, and I'll just throw a couple out that I know are measurable. And one is, we know that there's a positive influence on fresh air in the classroom, okay? So what percentage of our district, as we do reconstructs, are we converting over to influence fresh air into the room? There's a measurement that there's research that shows that directly improves performance. We know that certain uses of technology will provide the opportunity to increase performance. As a matter of fact, we know that the best mix right now from the early research seems to be kids doing not a totally flipped classroom, or not a flipped classroom or totally immersed, but actually a classroom where they spend time with the teacher, but they also are using technology on their own to actually learn things at the same time. So there's a way to measure that, because we have some classrooms in our district that are doing that and some that aren't. We've got an automatic control group, and we've got other groups where we can measure and look at that.
But is it worth it? I mean, that's my question is that line worth the time to measure it? Is it worth the picking it apart?
Here's why I think it is. Because if we can't explain from our own data why changes in facilities that we're putting taxpayer money into how they influence learning in a positive way, that we get asked that all the time, and it's a tough one to answer unless, now we can go to industry information that tells us that if you introduce fresh air in the classroom, you're going to get an improved learning. Certain types of lighting promote learning in the classroom, certain types detract from it. Here's another one, the sound systems. There's a lot of direct research. This impacts kids like me, that if I'm standing by someone and they're using that classroom voice, it automatically shuts me down. Whereas if they use a regular voice and it's being distributed around the room, they'll keep kids like me engaged. The other thing is, if I was in the other side of the room and something happened out the window, when I was a kid, in first grade, I was actually off my feet over to the window. By the time I was about a junior in high school, it was more like this. But that's all a distraction, whereas, and it's because you can't quite hear what the teacher's saying if you're over in this other side. So there are some things that we can do that would measure it, and they may not be the most impactful, but it's at least a start in getting our system used to measuring how facilities actually impact learning, so we can make those decisions. Some of it's by you're getting rid of the negative. So if the ceiling's leaking on a kid's head, it's hard for that kid to learn. So some of it's just you're getting rid of the negative measure of the disruption. But there are some positive things we can actually measure.
Sorry, I'm just trying to look for anything to shorten this list, and
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that we need to shorten
Yeah.
it. It's just it's there.
Well, and we don't have to start by measuring all those things, even though they're legit. I mean, start with what you think as a board you want to start with. We can add the other ones in later. It's not like this is just the first step. This isn't the whole story.
So I'm wondering, on the percentage of teachers and principals effective ratings, is it that we would hope that their ratings go up because we're investing in new buildings and we've put them in a nicer classroom and they have better facilities to use and now they have better technology? Or how are we tying that in?
I think that goes back to like the question that you asked before, and I think there's some things that we would say we ought to see a direct increase. So if we're giving kids one-to-one computing devices, and then we're training teachers on how to actually use that, and the research says that the mix of those two things should increase performance done well, then we should see teachers getting better, and we should see their results getting better at the same time, because we gave them a tool to solve some problems. I think that in a really, really big way, the way we collect that data right now, we might start collecting it and then begin asking questions about whether the way we're collecting it is really telling us anything. In other words, maybe our rubric for evaluation doesn't identify that well enough.
Right.
So we'd come back and go, well, we don't see a correlation, but guess what? We aren't really collecting that data in our evaluations. We have no idea who's using what, who's doing what. So I think that what it does is, again, you put it in place, and it starts to tell you how to make it better automatically as you start to collect the data. You either find out it's useless, or there's a way to tweak it to make it work. But again, don't feel like you have to fold them all in just because there's an explanation as to why it would be good. That's how it got in there in the first place.
Right.
Okay? Feel free to take stuff out. We can come, you as a board will come back and once you get, like, you feel like these ones that you pick are working for you, then we'll come and we'll add some more. I mean, eventually, we want more than 7 metrics.
I would just really like, at this point, because I know we're going to be talking about it at our retreat,
Mhm.
so I have one at least that I think that I might be able to get rid of.
Well, there might be more that you say you're not getting rid of them, but you're gonna set them off to the side, and we want to start with these other ones.
Prioritize.
I
That's-
personally think that's gonna happen anyways, because there's gonna be some that I say, we can get this, boom, 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 and it's done.
Yeah.
So we're gonna get that done, and then we're gonna have to go, okay, now what really do we mean here, and how are we gonna collect the data? There's gonna be some that are gonna take us longer to get
Yeah,
there.
you might want to start with the low-hanging fruit. You might want to start with the ones that are easy, that tell you something about the improvement that they could get right away, and then then you can mess with that, and you can give us the job to go off and say, we want to see these eventually, but we want you to go back and work on these and bring us back examples.
That practically,
that would be
that practically
the other way
makes
to
a
go
lot of
about it.
sense.
Mhm. I think we'll have plenty to talk about next week.
Yes, I think
It's a good preview, thank you.
Okay.
Then I think,
That's
think
about
that-
it.
yeah, I think at this,
We included our monthly reports, and otherwise, that wraps up a very intense meeting, and I'd like to give credit where credit is due, and Michelle Greenan puts this stuff together, and she's trying to get departments to get her stuff, and everybody's on their last minute, and they don't have it to her, and she has to get it, and where's the money coming from and all that. She does a fantastic job, and I almost feel that it's understating it to say that you're doing a great job, Michelle. She's just is the person that makes this thing work, and I appreciate the heck out of it. Thank you.
well, exhale this afternoon and tomorrow morning, get started on next month. New year, we got a new year. Or hey, we got a year-end party to plan.
right, the party planning for the fiscal new year is very important.
New Year's Eve. You're invited.
Well, thank you for everyone's participation. I do want to open it up, and because we have set aside time for public comment. If anyone would like to share public comment at this time, we welcome that. Seeing none, then I am happy to announce that the first Finance Operations Committee meeting of the new fiscal year will be July 10th, right here in this same room. We look forward to that time. Thank you.
Thanks.